Good morning. Welcome to our March Shen Subcommittee. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a very full and productive agenda, I hope. We'll begin with a call to the public, and we have a card from Greta Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members of the subcommittee. With regard to public comment and the budget hearings coming up shortly, I would like to recommend to you, as a subcommittee, that you ask for an update at a council meeting on the bond issue, which we passed in '05, became effective 1/1/06. We've never had one that I'm aware of since then, and it's now over 10 years old. And I think it's time we had an update on what it has accomplished and what remains to be accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you. That does sound like something that would be worth doing, especially the legislature is editing our ability on general obligation bonds, so it's a very timely comment. We also have a card from Diane Barker.
Good morning, Chairwoman Gallegos and subcommittee. Diane Barker, and I'm in District 7. And last night I got my centennial shirt for Fit Phoenix. You know, what we do on Mondays in Phoenix, we get out no matter the weather or if it's a holiday. And I just, in case I am unable to stay for all of your presentation, I've looked at the agenda and I approve of the items as they are stated, you know, with the air quality. I am for cutting down on air quality, the bad air quality. And the thing is that we have today an announcement that ADOT says 38% of the debris on the highways is cigarette butts. And I noticed when I was helping clean up Phoenix a couple years ago with Keep Phoenix Beautiful, that was a great amount on Adams Street of the debris were cigarette butts. And so they need a curb your butt program. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of our last meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. We do have a consent agenda today. Would anyone be willing to move the consent agenda?
So moved.
A second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Congratulations to Native American Connections and good luck. We have an air quality update now. I would welcome Geese with our Office of Environmental Programs.
Good morning, Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee. Joe Giudice with the Office of Environmental Programs here. Going to share with you an update on the status of our air quality. Our last update report was back in 2014, so I think we've got some really positive news to share in how our region is doing in achieving the 2050 environmental sustainability goal that Council adopted in April of 2016, which is to achieve a level of air quality that is healthy for all residents and the natural environment. So I'm going to cover the federal health standards for 6 air pollutants, and really I'm going to focus in on these 3, which is carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and ground level ozone. And I'm focusing on those 3 because those are the 3 air pollutants that we monitor in our region that the region has had struggles in meeting the federal health standards in the past. So before getting into the details on those pollutants, I did want to share this slide. This is from the Environmental Protection Agency. And this slide shows that since 1970, which was the passage of the Clean Air Act, and I would also point out that there's been a lot of efforts from states and local governments and counties and other agencies to improve air quality. There's been a 70% reduction in the pollution, these 6 pollutants in our air in the United States. Meanwhile, EPA points out we've had growth in gross domestic product. There's been more cars on the road. Population has grown. Energy consumption has grown. The point being that we're able to still have a vibrant economy and achieve improvements in air quality and clean water and other things. All right, so I want to get to carbon monoxide, which was the first pollutant that our region had struggles with. Back in the 1980s, we had sometimes over 100 to 200 days a year where we couldn't meet the federal health standard for carbon monoxide. So the great story is we've been able to achieve an 81% decrease in carbon monoxide levels monitored in our region since then. And we're 70% below the federal health standard. So our air is very clean when it comes to carbon monoxide. So this was accomplished by, well, the catalytic converter really was a big key. Invention is the mother of necessity. Also different fuel formulations, emission control technologies on vehicles, and things like vehicle inspection programs to make sure that those emission systems were up and running were the key to this success. Okay, now I want to move on to a discussion of particulate matter. And it's helpful to just talk about the two different sizes of particles that are regulated by the federal government. So the little blue sphere inside this cutout of what's supposed to be representative of a human hair is about the size of particulate matter 10, which we would say is dust. And then the little red sphere within that is about the size of particulate matter 2.5, which is kind of things from wood smoke, vehicle emissions that might happen, things like that. And one thing I want to point out is the human body has the ability to filter out the larger size particles, generally speaking, but the smaller particles are what gets into our lungs and can cause bigger health problems. Not that both don't cause health problems, because they do. They both cause like asthma triggers and things like that. Okay, so how are we doing as a region when it comes to our dust, the larger particle size? We have had a 47% decrease in actual monitored results since 1990. These are the monitors that have been in place since 1990, so not all of the monitors in the region have been there. And these happen to be in our Phoenix area. So we've had some great success in terms of improving dust in our region. And a really important thing to point out here is that unlike carbon monoxide, which was federal standards on vehicles and things like that that really helped, these are really the actions of Phoenix, other local governments, the county, the state, to do things like agricultural best management practices, dust proofing, paving projects, things like that that really helped to drive these improvements. Such that in 2014, May of 2014, we were able to demonstrate to the EPA that our region is now complying with the federal health standards for dust, and they agreed. So we are now in compliance with the standard. It does bring me to want to talk a little bit about what's referred to as exceptional events in the Clean Air Act. And I just love this visual of this dust storm that came through Phoenix back in 2011, so I had to find a reason to put it in there. But dust storms would be what's considered an exceptional event under the Clean Air Act. And what I really want to point out here from this slide is that with the black line representing the federal health standard, this yellow ribbon is the actual monitored results for particulate matter 10 when dust storm results are included in those calculations. We would actually not be meeting the federal health standards if that was required to be included. But because we were able to make the demonstration to EPA and they accepted that demonstration, that's how we're able to achieve compliance. Okay, so now I'd like to talk about particulate matter 2.5, the smaller particulate matter. Often from wood smoke, could be from fireworks on those few days when we're allowed to have fireworks. The next day we tend to have PM 2.5 issues in the valley. This chart is from Maricopa County's Environmental Services Department, or Burn Cleaner, Burn Better campaign. Chairwoman Gallego, I would love to thank you for your participation on that campaign this year. We had great success this year. Only one day this year where we actually had a violation at a monitor for PM 2.5. So our region has always been in compliance with the standard. That's the good news, but we have been very close to the standard for PM 2.5. And one of the challenges we have is that when we tend to have burning of fireplaces and outdoor burning is during our winter months when we have this weather pattern of inversion where that gets trapped where at our level where we're breathing it. So it's one of the challenges for us. I also want to just share that Maricopa County is undertaking a fireplace retrofit program. Again, Chairwoman, thank you for your help in getting outreach on that program. I'm hearing they're having some really good success with that. That is a program to help, actually it's focused in Phoenix, and it helps Phoenix homeowners convert their fireplaces from to natural gas. And so we may come back to share this progress of that at some point in the future. All right, so now I'd like to switch to ozone. Ozone is a little bit more of a complicated pollutant to deal with. It's not emitted directly by any sources, but in fact it's nitrogen oxides often emitted from vehicle emissions, as well as volatile organic compounds from vehicle emissions that chemically react in the presence of sunlight, of which you can imagine we have plenty of here in the Valley of the Sun, and that forms ozone. But ozone also moves a lot in our atmosphere. So where do those oxides of nitrogen and those sources of volatile organics compounds come from? The real takeaway I'd like for this slide is to realize that if we can tackle the issue of emissions from vehicles, whether they're on-road or off-road sources, we could really make further progress in dealing with our ozone issues here in the Valley. That's the key point. And this is where I'd like to share about how ozone moves in our atmosphere here. So this shows the red circles are essentially where the monitors are, and the larger red circles are a little bit further away from meeting the federal health standard. The smaller circles are a little closer. But essentially, these are where ozone is being detected at levels above the federal health standard. And what you can notice from here is a lot of it's to the north and east in our county versus in the west and the south. And that's, again, because of our weather patterns and where the formation of ozone is, but how it moves throughout the day. You know, we have readings up by Lake Roosevelt where there's not really any of these sources being emitted, but yet they're having ozone exceedances out there. So how are we doing with respect to the federal health standard when it comes to ozone? The 1997 standard of 80 parts per billion, we are meeting that standard here as a region. Then there was a new standard adopted in 2008 by EPA. We are not meeting that standard, but we are just so darn close. If we have another great season this year, this summer ozone season, and when I say great, I would say compared to the last 2 years where we had very few exceedances, I think we're going to be able to demonstrate that we're meeting this standard. And that's going to be a great accomplishment for us because I don't think many of us thought we'd be able to get there a few years back. And then in 2015, EPA adopted a new standard at 70. So we're going to have a ways to go before we're going to be able to achieve this standard as a region. Okay, so I'd like to just end on just sharing with you a few of the strategies that we're going to be working on out of our office and as a city. When it comes to the PM10 and PM 2.5, our focus is going to be to try to continue progress, staying below the federal health standard, improving upon our current position and being below the federal health standard. When it comes to ozone, we're really looking for opportunities for our region to continue to make progress. And we're hopeful that the Volkswagen settlement, which has been mentioned before, might have some funds that help us to do some things with vehicle emissions. I'm very hopeful that electric vehicles really take hold, perhaps, and become a real market-driven solution to ozone pollution. So we're really looking for those kinds of benefits. When it comes to asthma, we want to do a little bit more in working with the scientific community and health agencies and looking at our most vulnerable populations on how we can improve health outcomes from impacts from our regional air quality. When it comes to education and outreach, we want to work with our Office of Youth and Education and make sure we're helping facilitate the resources that are out there for schools to be able to educate, but also to be able to create an environment for students where their indoor air quality is of a high level for them to be healthy. When it comes to mulch fires and outdoor combustibles, as the solid waste industry moves towards repurposing materials that otherwise went to the landfill, so for example, green waste and vegetative waste, We just want to make sure that that's managed in a way, and it can be managed properly, but in a way that's not going to create fires. And I think we've all seen on the news a big pile of green waste that catches fire, and that becomes an air quality issue. So we certainly want to work to prevent that. And then climate change, I think you're familiar with our work there. We're going to continue that progress on both our municipal operations goal and working on developing a community goal. And with that, I'll take questions.
Councilwoman.
Could you give me an example of how we can better control mulch fires?
I can. It's really about management practices. So if the operation that is managing those mulch piles manages that properly, continues to turn the piles, it's just very active management, then you will prevent fires. But if they just pile it together and water it and leave it be, then you're going to have a likelihood of fires occurring. And so we really need to look at developing best management practices. And it is a regional challenge. It's not just a Phoenix challenge.
And I think maybe last year we adopted some changes to the code that required better management, but also water on site or a water source.
Yes, that's correct. Chairwoman, we have worked collectively with multiple departments to improve our process for both permitting these types of activities as well as fire management, et cetera. And I think we've made some really good progress there.
And I think we were hoping to encourage the county for County Islands to do the same.
Yeah.
Since-
Yes, Chairwoman, that's correct.
Do we know if they've adopted any changes? I know that is not your area, but.
Chairwoman, actually, we have been working with Maricopa County collectively. They were actually participated even within our own internal processes. We actually worked with both the State of Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, Maricopa County Air Quality Department, and our internal departments to collaborate on solutions.
Wonderful. And I think, thank you so much for this great update. We at the city have had a lot of great partners, including the county and the state, and ASU has been providing us wonderful support. So I wanted to recognize Kyle Goebel and his team who have been helping us, including with some issues in District 8. Thank you for being here. We have a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, in my district, there are communities where the majority of the young people have asthma right now. That's hard to hear, and that's really something, if we want to think about the future of our city, that we need to consider what we can do to change that. 'Cause to be so young and to already have respiratory challenges. So I'm glad to see that on the list and would welcome any ideas you have in that particular area.
And if I might, I'd like to introduce Caroline Lobo. Caroline serves on our Environmental Quality and Sustainability Subcommission as of tomorrow, hopefully, if it passes council. And so she's here for another item, but I thought I would introduce her as a citizen servant to our community. Thank you.
And certainly, air quality has been an issue on which the Environmental Quality Commission in its past has done a lot of work, including the fireplace standards that went countywide came out of our citizen commission. So it is wonderful when we get great ideas from our commissions and then they can become public policy. As you know, I'm very interested in electric vehicles, and I've seen other communities, such as in Colorado, that have done voluntary programs to promote electric vehicles. Is that something we could look at in the city of Phoenix?
I feel like you're setting me up with all the great answers, Caroline. Thank you so much. The city of Phoenix is working in partnership with EVAZ right now to do a program just such as that, which would be to help promote getting electric vehicle dealerships to offer an incentive program in terms of purchase price and perhaps charging stations. I don't know if the exact nature of the program's been completely flushed out, but we are working exactly on that. And I anticipate sometime this year there will be a program that'll run for 6 months or so where citizens can buy an electric vehicle at a discounted price, perhaps get a charging station along with that, and we're expecting to see some good vehicle sales from that.
Wonderful. Get some tax revenue and improve our air quality. Excellent. And then one air quality program that does cause some frustration is our improved parking lots and dust. So we do have people who will park on parking lots that are not improved and get dust violations, and that's one. I think almost no one understands that program and what is a parking lot that is approved always. And that's something I would love to see us do more education about, because right now it seems to do more to frustrate residents than to improve our air quality. I think we've had several people who work in this building who have gotten parking tickets. And that just shows maybe there's an education gap about where you can park and who's responsible for what.
Noted, and we will take a look at that. Thank you,
Fabulous.
Chairman.
Excellent. Any further questions from my colleagues?
No, thank you for your leadership, and Councilwoman, thank you for your leadership as well, on especially on this. I know that you've been on the council now for, I don't know, 3.5 years, and I think this has been one of the constant topics that you've been pushing the council and the city on, so thank you.
Thank you for the good work and good update. We will look forward to continued work on this issue, and thank you to our partners on this. We'll move on to energy efficiency incentive updates, and welcome our famous Environmental Quality Commissioner along with our Planning Director, Alan Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. As you'll note, I am not Mark Hartman presenting this item, but he has led the charge on this effort, but regrettably can't be here this morning. I do have Mo Glancy, Assistant Director with the Planning Development Department, and also Carolyn Lobo, who you were just introduced. She is the immediate past president of the Arizona chapter of the AIA, and they're a partner with us, in addition to the Planning Development Department and the Office of Sustainability, are working on this overall project here. And so we're excited to talk with you here and provide some information and update on this plan incentive program for the community. And so what you see here is the city had a Energize Phoenix program that was very successful back in 2010, 2015, where we had a $25 million grant under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act for the Department of Energy to provide incentives to residents and businesses to improve their energy efficiency. And so the city has went through that, and there's a little bit of remaining funds available. The success of that really was that we had 2,014 residential units were upgraded. We had 33 million commercial square feet was upgraded with energy efficient improvements, and an estimated $12 million in savings annually for all of their energy bills were done through that whole program. As I noted, there is some additional funding that is available out of that same program, and so the Department of Energy and the city worked to get approval to use those residual funds to help develop some new programs. And this is the first of those programs that we are going to unveil here today. And so we have been working with stakeholders such as builders and developers and all the 3 utilities to come up with these to really identify highest and best use of that incentive money so that we can maximize energy efficiency, because that's really what the overall intent of that money from the Department of Energy was. And so with that, I will introduce our Sustainable Home Design Competition, and Mo Glancy is going to walk us through the particulars of that item. And then we will have Carolyn go say a couple words as well.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So this first program, the Sustainable Home Design Competition, it'll be launched, it's a partnership with Planning Development Department, Mark's office, and the AIA. And it will be launched coming up fairly soon. We're working on the final details of it. Oh, thank you. Thanks. So with the DOE funding, we were going to use $100,000 to offer a prize to design a house that can be widely adopted in the city. There are 3 aspects to this house. It has to have an 80% reduction in energy usage. It has to provide evidence that it can be easily constructed at basically the current prices that our homes are being constructed at right now. And then it's going to be open source. So the $100,000 will be paid to the architect after Planning and Development has reviewed the plans, made sure that they're all code compliant, and then we post those online for anybody to use. A couple of more aspects about the program. We'll partner with other local cities to offer that same home design to other cities, and so that they can use it valley-wide. And one unique aspect is we're going to have the panel made up of city staff, members of the AIA, and local builders and designers, so that we can get a really broad view at what's being done. And not only will this house offer people the opportunity to come in and build it without going through a plan review, but it'll also give people ideas of the best ways, the best practices to reduce energy and still meet, current construction costs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Caroline to say a few words.
Chairwoman Gallego and members of the committee, thank you for having me here. Firstly, I'll make a comment on behalf of the Environmental Quality Commission. As commissioner, I really appreciate the staff, especially Joe and Mark and every one of you that has, really worked with the commissioners to coming up with ideas that really make our city better. So thank you to all of you for making this happen. It's a great partnership between the citizens and the staff. And now, wearing my hat as representing 2,300 members with the American Institute of Architects, we are really excited about this program. We think that design really matters, and sustainability is such an integral part of good design that if a good, sustainable home can be replicated over and over again, it makes so much of a difference to the quality of our environment. It's better for us, it's better for our communities, and it's better for our future generations. So thank you, and we appreciate you taking this forward with this design competition.
Congratulations to you. You won a big award for your work with Grand Canyon University from the Red Development Awards. So
Thank you.
appreciate your work in multiple hats with our city. Wonderful. And will we reach out to also home builders to make sure that they are aware of this and that we have?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, yes. And Mo has had some initial discussions with them about it as well, and so they're aware of it, and we will continue to keep them involved because the whole goal is really to provide this out there and get it built and replicated as much as possible so that we can get some local experience with building something that's that energy efficient and try and make it sure that the public, our stakeholder public in terms of the home builders, but also the general public, are aware of those opportunities and that they're affordable and reasonable cost alternatives.
Wonderful. There have been some great innovations in Phoenix in the multifamily market with net zero, and we're just getting there with individual single-family homes, but hopefully this can really spur along the innovation. I think Phoenix has been a leader in sustainable development, and this will help us stay on that map. So.
Absolutely.
You said you're partnering with other cities. Is this so that in the future, if there is like a prototype, any city would issue the building permit? I was trying to follow
Yes,
that.
Councilwoman, that's the idea, is that most of the cities in the valley are on the same building code, and so once we approve it with our code, it should be usable in any other city, and so that's sort of the idea.
So they wouldn't have to go through a plan review?
Wouldn't have to go through a plan review either.
They would just go to the building permit itself? Okay,
Exactly.
thank you. That's cool.
Wonderful. And it would be great if we can share that when we have meetings with other
Yeah,
planning and
absolutely.
development departments as well.
Right. And there will be a public process as a part of this design competition, so everyone will be in the know.
So I would note one of the other items that's, there's $100,000 to win, but there's also $25,000 that's allocated to pay for the development review fees to get the first 10 of them built, to help publicize. So there's budget money there to get the word out about it, to get some of those ones built. So it really is a comprehensive, look at it. We didn't highlight that 25,000 part, but that will help us get the word out throughout and get those first 10 ones built, because they won't have to pay review fees to get those ones done. That'll be done by us, and the incentive money will cover that.
So just as a follow-up, what about existing homes? Are we going to look at retrofitting? I mean, not everyone can go out and buy a new house, obviously, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that have homes, they like to be more energy efficient. So is there an idea about looking at that?
Yes, Councilwoman. Some of the other ideas that we've looked at is there are some additional funds available. Looking at where can you get the most bang for your buck? So for instance, is it windows? If you really spend some extra money on windows, can you really reduce it? And so we're looking at ways to use that to maybe do some studies on cost versus benefit on some of the most energy efficient items.
So the remaining Department of Energy monies is about $500,000, and so we're spending $125,000 of that on this effort. And as we said, this is the first one, but we can certainly look at that other element going forward and other ideas that we're talking about with the utilities and the builders to figure out how do we best spend that money to really try and incentivize energy savings, but also something that we can then talk about and show so that we can have the private sector see that it's cost effective to replicate on their own.
The two other programs that are referenced relate just to existing homes, but then also incentives for some components in new home construction. Those elements are going to be developed this year with input from stakeholders and rolled out hopefully this calendar year, later this calendar year. So those are to come.
Wonderful. We will look forward to that. Well, thank you for your hard work on this program, and thank you to AIA for your partnership. We'll look forward to visiting these homes when they are built. Thank you. We are going to make a slight change to the agenda and take item number 8 out of order, which is the improvements to the procurement of goods and services. So we'll welcome Denise Olson, our Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. We're back again today to discuss proposed improvements to our citywide procurement process. And with me, I have Jim Campion, who is the Deputy Finance Director over procurement activities for the city. And I also have Rob Sweeney, who is coordinating with the City Manager's Office on Advanced Phoenix recommendations, and he's the Assistant Finance Director. And we also have Kimber Lanning, who represents Local First. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Campion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. As you will recall, we were here last month, and we were kind of providing some findings and recommendations from the Advanced Phoenix Kaizen team. And we wanted to come back today and kind of ask for your approval. We are recommending raising the thresholds outlined in the procurement code. Currently, these are our current sourcing thresholds. As you can see, below $5,000 is small dollar. We're proposing raising it to below $8,600 to match the payment ordinance amount. The informal is below $50,000 currently. We'd like to recommend raising it, the Kaizen team, to below $100,000. And then the formal currently is at or above $50,000, and we're recommending raising it to at or above $100,000. This would also get us consistent with other local jurisdictions. And as you know, we use many of their cooperative agreements, and it also makes it easier on the business community in the Valley. They can, when they're proposing on procurements, the thresholds are they're aligned. So, and an important note, council approval still remains at the payment ordinance threshold of $8,600. So even though the procurement methods changed, the payment ordinance amount remains at $8,600. The formal process, the Kaizen team did a analysis of the formal process currently for procurement officers across the city, and they found in many cases it takes over 300 days to complete a formal procurement process over $50,000. Scope of work development, there's packaging the procurement process, advertising the process, and then once the bids come in, there's an evaluation process that takes place with working with the user departments, the recommendation for award, and then ultimately, before we can execute any contract, obviously, it requires council approval. So overall, the Kaizen team found out that this, in many cases, is taking over 300 days. So that's the formal process currently.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we also looked at the timelines it took to do our informal thresholds as well as the small dollar. And so what we're describing to you here, the informal threshold takes about 45 days to complete, from quotation process all the way through council adoption. And the small dollar can be done in a matter of days, which we're estimating around 5. So our goal is to push down as many of the procurements down to that lower threshold as possible, so that way we can be much more efficient and much more effective with our time. Having a $5,000 and $50,000 thresholds for the volume within the city of Phoenix is quite low. So we're looking to raise those with the ultimate goal of increased quality of the procurement, the goods that we procure, goods and services we procure, as well as lowering our cost point. So if we are able to seek your approval here today, as well as full council, in increasing our thresholds, we believe that we can increase our productivity by about 25%. We would be able to complete an additional 55 formal procurements on a given fiscal year. And what that will allow us to do is make sure that we're taking the lead in those procurements and be that lead agency. What we're doing today, where items might need a formal procurement, we are actually bringing forward to council an extension of an agreement, if it's still possible to do that, or we're recognizing a cooperative from another jurisdiction. when we don't have the time to do a formal procurement. So we're still getting those complete, but we are not able to take full advantage of our process and looking at the things that we need for the city of Phoenix. And in addition to our productivity, there are other benefits that we believe are out there for the community. One of them is to help actually the small businesses. It's a very cumbersome process to buy anything over $5,000 today. And if we can get that to $8,600 as well as push our formal down to a much more manageable timeline, it helps their speed to market and their ability to compete for business. Additionally, it allows us to be more strategic in our view of what we want to procure. Instead of just recognizing cooperative agreements or trying to extend, we can be more strategic in looking at citywide of those elements that we're looking at buying, packaging it together to look at for a better price point with our goods. Additionally, it's a simplified process for staff. Right now, there's confusion between the $5,000 limit and what needs to go to council at $8,600. By aligning those together, we'll simplify the processes for the departments themselves. And additionally, as Jim had indicated, we want to be comparable to the other jurisdictions, especially as we bring forth to council the cooperative agreements that are executed. We want to make sure that we're in line with that. So right now, we are lower than actually their thresholds today. So we want to make sure that there are some comparable levels within the community.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'd like to invite Kimber to talk about the advantages that our small and local businesses are also seeing through this process.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time today. So there are really 4 key areas that we see as advantageous for approval of this amendment. The first one I'd like to name is that we do see the need to streamline the process for staff. We're very mindful of making sure that they are able to really provide the time and detail that are needed, focused attention on these procurements as they come through, and currently as it is, they don't have enough flexibility. The second area that we see as a distinct advantage is the streamlined process. This is my number one priority, is making it simpler for the small businesses to get at the table. We see that they are incredibly burdened by the process of getting into the formal process, and so the informal process allows more flexibility, not only for the businesses to get in, but for the staff to get them through the process and to build those relationships. And then additionally, I wanted to point out that we have been working diligently with the team at the city to conduct outreach events to get more small businesses into the city's database. And so what that looks like is Local First Arizona taking a leadership role in bringing together the Phoenix Chamber, ASBA, the Hispanic Chamber, the Black Chamber, the LGBT Chamber, Small Minority Business Development Services, and others, in a unified front to bring together businesses that are part of all of those networks into one audience twice a year so that the city can come in and walk them through the process of getting into the city's database. And we have found that to be very effective, and we have found that the city has been incredibly receptive to opening the doors to these smaller businesses to be able to get into the network. And we do think that an increase in this threshold will enable more businesses to get into the table and have an opportunity to compete. And then my final point is that from an economic perspective, we believe that diversifying the database as much as possible and enabling the city to procure goods from more small businesses is nothing but good news for the city overall. We can be leveraging the spend of the city to drive Phoenix's economy and to drive Arizona's economy overall, creating jobs and opportunities while not spending any more money. So we think it's a good thing. So thank you for your time.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, in conclusion, staff is proposing a recommendation for increasing the procurement formal threshold to $100,000. The informal procurement threshold would be anything below $100,000. We would be proposing increasing the small dollar threshold to equal the payment ordinance amount, so that would be an increase from $5,000 to $8,600. And again, I want to stress that City Council will see all purchases over $8,600. That has not changed. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for the partnership, and thank you to Local First for working with us. We had an update on our efforts to partner with local banks, and you had some examples of banks that had benefited and projects we'd seen in our community. Do you have an example of a good project, a success story for from our partnership with Local First, someone who got into our city procurement process?
There are quite a few different stories. We've worked together for screen printing services. We definitely have some cleaning services, janitorial services. And there's a third one I'm thinking of that was just at the meeting the other night. I want to say it was something in the neighborhood of security background check services. So those would be three solid examples of small businesses that are incredibly excited about the opportunity. And they're growing their companies, and you can already see them hiring additional people and creating jobs right here.
Wonderful. Are there metrics we should keep to keep track of the impact of this effort? Is there data we should have?
We're doing our best on our part, but we could probably work a little more closely on that because I'm sure there are ones that have been awarded that I'm actually not privy to. So we could probably link arms a little bit more closely to provide some data over time of the outcomes.
Wonderful, because I think this group would love to see
Absolutely.
the economic impact of our local business spend.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, because of the new Procure Phoenix system, we can actually track all of this information, and we'll gather this data and we can report back to the subcommittee. We probably need a year to actually gather the information.
But we could search for everyone in Arizona we do
Absolutely.
business with.
Absolutely.
Any questions from my colleagues? Well, thank you for your hard work on this. Please thank the Advanced Phoenix team as well from us.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yeah,
I
we're
think
actually-
we need an action on this item, is what's recommended.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Now we will return to item number 5, the workforce diversity update. It's a very timely one, as right after talking about local business, we can also talk about local hiring, and then we are coming up on our anniversary of our work on equal pay as well. So we'll welcome, I believe we're starting off with Don Loken.
Madam Chair, members of the Council Subcommittee, I'm Don Logan, Equal Opportunity Director. Joining me in this morning's presentation is Cindy Bezery, the Acting Human Resources Director, and Felipe Moreno, who's the Deputy Public Works Director. Today, we're going to talk with you, or provide you an overview of the workforce diversity in the city of Phoenix. And in doing so, I take pride in sharing with you that respect for diversity is one of our core values, and one that serve as a guiding principle in dictating how our employees work with each other and provide a service to the citizens that we serve. So when we look at our organization in terms of employee profile, we are an organization that is comprised of 13,286 full-time, temporary, and part-time employees. Of that, 12,202 are full-time. The average length of service is 12 and a half years, down from the average of 15 years in years past, and we attribute that to retirements. Our average age is 45. That number is reduced from 48. The annual turnover rate is 8.67. The city has more than 800 job classifications across 34 departments and functional areas. In terms of gender distribution, we are an organization that has 69% male employees and 31% female. By comparison, we took a look at sworn versus civilian employees, and please note that obviously there's work to be done in the sworn, and I say sworn, I'm thinking public service, firefighters, police. We have 90% male, 10% female. By comparison, civilians, the entire workforce, that number is much different. We have, note, a total of 58% male employees and 42% female. So with that, Cindy Bezery will talk about
Good morning. I think one of our next very important diverse populations is our veterans. We are blessed to have a large population of veterans here in the workforce, both active, inactive, retired veterans. And you can see from the indication that we have also been recognized as an Arizona Veteran Supportive Employer. We've also been recognized as an employer in support of the Guard and Reserve. So a very important population, and a population we'll be targeting, as you know, going forward. Workforce diversity, we do engender through the work that both Don's department does and the Human Resource Department does to look like our community. That's very important as we serve our community. This gives you a feel for our workforce compared to the Phoenix population census. What's important to note here is going forward, we'll be doing a great deal more work in this using the community survey. This tells you what the population looks like, but it doesn't tell you what the workforce and the labor force looks like. So EOD will be reestablishing a report that had been done several years ago. Hopefully we can start the data dives later this fall, and we can put it out truly comparing ourselves to who's in the labor force today and what are we doing to attract and look like that labor force within our labor force. As you know, management diversity has been a focus here for the last couple of years. Our data continues to be good, and as you will notice on this list, we have an exceptional amount of leadership in this city, either from diverse populations or female populations. Councilwoman Gallego and I talked recently about our lead 4 departments in the city. Our largest 4 departments are led by females at this particular time, and that's a credit to the recruitment, but also to the ability of females to rise in this organization.
Now, we understand that there are certain positions that are so designated male-dominated, but we also have non-traditional positions that we feel we're making progress in terms of women providing emerging numbers for women. In this case, we got ITS specialists, senior ITS specialists, engineering technicians, as well as senior engineering technicians. Talked about firefighters, police officers. We feel very good about the progress that we're seeing. And some examples of the progress that we're seeing is people of color. We've seen an increase of 11 positions in the ITS specialist positions, 5 females as well. Under the bailiff classification, we feel that 14 female persons of colors have been hired. And engineering technicians, senior engineering technicians, we've seen 14 female employees hired of color, 4 females, 16 male persons of color. And while we can point to the progress that we've seen in terms of evidence of people of color and females in these non-traditional roles, I would tell you that we have several other classifications throughout the organizations where we still have work to do. So that's areas that we have targeted as areas for improvement.
What I'd like to do for the next few slides is take a deeper dive into the data that talks about, are we an employer of choice? You know, we've focused a great deal of our efforts this year in public safety hiring, both police and fire. And so you have to take a deeper look into the data to say, are we attracting? Are they passing our tests to get hired? And so what you'll see is here comparatively the 3 years of the number of females that have tested or applied to police officer or laterals within the city. And as you can see, that number is steadily increasing through the great work that's being done by that recruitment team in the police department. In the next slide, what you'll see is of those that you saw on the first slide, those that are passing and getting on the eligible list. Again, what you're seeing over the 3-year progression is a significant number is increasing and ever increasing to make sure that we're getting these female applicants on our eligibility list to be selected from. In the next slide, what you'll see is the total number of female officers who've made it from slide 1 to slide 2, and now they're in our recruitment classes or on their active employment. So we went from a very low number in 14 where we weren't doing hiring to 28, and I think several are in this next recruitment class. So we are seeing very slowly, and it does take time, results of those recruitment efforts by the police team. The next slide then starts that same progression of data for our firefighters. We did not hold any recruitments in 2014 for firefighters. So in 2015, there was a huge major recruitment effort. We brought in 121 tested and applied. This year, we brought in another 110. Of those that tested and applied, then, here's what made it to the eligible list for firefighter, 83 in 15. A slight decrease in 2016. We held more classes in 15 than we did in 16. And for those that were hired, we're dead even. So we are seeing some results there. Probably not as much as we'd like, but we're not hiring at the same level and rate in our fire department as we are our police department. So some other things we've done, and I think those of you who were with us a couple of years ago when we talked about equal pay and we talked about what could we be doing to advancing women in the organization, Public Works had started this fantastic internal program where they were bringing women together with speakers and luncheons. And what we did is we asked our organizational development team through Colleen Dorame, the coordinator, to take on this and make it a citywide effort. And so Women in Leadership was created. It's a fantastic networking opportunity. They do a lot of regular events, and it's starting some new programs this year, especially in mentoring. The next slide will show you an example of all of the different activities that have taken place in the city through the Women in Leadership, the levels of attendance we've received, and the interest that we have across the city in non-traditional roles as well as technology and employee wellness. So this is a fabulous effort that's going on, to Colleen's credit. It's a lot of coordination that takes place, but I think it's a continued and a very important effort at the city, and I know their next focus is a mentoring program. They're working on that right now. And then building diverse applicant pools. Like we said with police and fire, you really have to start at the beginning, and so we're starting to see the results of building those pools from the beginning. There's deeper dive information that we can take on in the future based on our efforts to talk about different targeted occupations. We're doing weekly outreach. I think everybody knows that. We've got supervisory toolkits to make sure that we're making the right selections when we are. Beyond that, Rhonda Wilson, our Deputy Director of Employment Services, Talent Acquisition, is doing much more targeted advertising. She has her team out regularly at job fairs in all kinds of diverse populations. One of our staff has a regular radio show, if you've not heard it before. Charmian Hines does a spot on KJazz. And we have been nationally recognized, and a lot of people may not realize this, for our intern program. We have done a fabulous job recruiting diverse populations and women into that program for many, many years here, and we continue that program.
And one of the challenges of most diversity initiatives is that you spend a lot of resources in recruiting, hiring diverse employees. And the challenge is creating an environment where people feel like they're welcome and they're valued. So the employee resource groups, formerly referred to as affinity groups, have served the city well in terms of creating an opportunity or resource to our employees that enable them to learn and understand the culture within the City of Phoenix organization. And clearly, the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, NFEPA, as well as the Phoenix Hispanic Network, City of Phoenix Asian League, National American Employee Group, and the City of Phoenix Employees for Christ, these, I'm accustomed to calling them affinity groups, but the new jargon, I'm told by HR, is employee resource groups. So I'm in transition as we speak. But through diversity and inclusion and creating an organization where people feel valued, these organizations are critical to helping employees transition to a culture that may be different than what they are accustomed to. The next program that we're going to ask Felipe to talk about is one that we feel is very positive in terms of leadership apprentice program. And with that, Felipe, if you can talk about that program.
Great. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, very excited to talk about our laborers apprenticeship program. During our last round of labor negotiations, the Public Works Department worked collaboratively with the Human Resources Department, the Parks and Recreation Department, and LIUNA, Local 77, our labor partners, to establish an apprenticeship program for our solid waste equipment operator and our gardener positions. So really trying to attract and grow great solid waste equipment operators and gardeners from the ground up, creating a diverse, skilled workforce. And so I'm happy to report our first phase is our solid waste equipment operator position apprenticeship program is going to launch on Monday. We have 7 apprentices, very diverse. We have a woman, which we're very proud of because that'll be our 4th operator in the city, as well as a veteran. So we are very excited that we are starting to see the fruits of our labors of our outreach to do a diverse class. And so during their first year, we will teach them to get their commercial driver's license. They will learn all about solid waste and the equipment that we operate. And then in their second year, they'll graduate in and become a SWEO and basically provide the full range of services out there in the community. So super excited about that. Our second phase is going to be our gardener position, which will launch around next year. And from there, we'll be learning the science. They will be learning all of the skills that it takes to be a gardener out in the parks. And that's exciting because these are two very critical services that we provide out to the public. And so creating that diverse workforce that we can grow from the ground up and retain and attract and develop through a full city career is going to be really exciting for us. As soon as we launch our positions this Monday, we're going to already get hot and heavy on the outreach, because the next thing we want to do is start really focusing out into the community to attract, again, women, veterans, and youth. We want to really partner with initiatives such as My Brother's Keeper, initiatives out in the public, to bring in youth that maybe are looking for a step in to start a career with the city, don't really know where to start, and gain some really valuable skills. And so this is our first class of 7, and then we'll be launching a class of 7 each year moving forward. And so I do want to say another thank you to our labor partners, Launa Local 77, for their extreme support. They've invested time, they've invested money into the training, into the resources to help our program be successful, and we would not have been able to do this without them.
So, Madam Chair, that concludes our presentation. Members of the subcommittee, if there are questions that you have, we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Councilwoman.
Thank you. On these employee resource groups, are you open to other groups, or how are they formed? For example, the LGBTQ community, perhaps they might want to have a resource group.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Stark, we pride ourselves of creating an organization that is open and inclusive. Any group that feels that they benefit from participating in these types of functions certainly is, we would be open to helping them create and start their programs.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Any further questions from my colleagues? Well, thank you very much for this update. It was great to see. It's nice to see everything in one place about all the work that we are doing. We certainly have a lot more work to do, but we are making progress. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will next move to our monthly item, the excess property disposal update. And welcome Paul Blue, our Deputy City Manager.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. We're here today to give you an update on the city's property disposal progress. And as staff will demonstrate, we've made progress in our review of all city properties with, believe it or not, we only have one department left to review, which is the aviation department. With me today is Tim McBride, who's an MA2 in the city manager's office, helping me kind of drive the larger process. And then Jamie Spear is our assistant real estate administrator. Tim's going to describe property review progress and give you some updates in a few specific areas. And then Jamie's going to outline today's recommendation to move 146 properties towards disposal. Tim?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Hard to believe a month has passed since we last reported, but some great progress has been achieved in that time, which I'll walk us through today. Catch up to where we are. As you may recall, there are 4 key metrics that we're looking at every month to see how the property review team is moving along. And the first one is number of parcels reviewed. And so last time we were here, we were at 1,000 parcels. The number is now just over 4,000. So just about 3/4 of the way through. Yeah. Just about 3/4 of the way through the total number, which is about 5,500. The next factor that we'll look at is excess property inventory. So that number continues to grow. Let's see, I think today we're at about 656 parcels, and I'll walk through what that looks like. Currently we have 38 parcels that are for sale, and we have one that's going to be listed here shortly. We have 43 that have been approved for disposal by the subcommittee, and will be listed as soon as possible. That requires council action. Some will be going forward at tomorrow's formal meeting, and then others will go forward in April. We have 132 parcels that are under contract or currently under negotiations. We have 25 that are going to be quitclaimed. And then we have 417 excess parcels that staff is actively considering or pursuing some disposal options. Next, we have parcels disposed. Last time we were at 131. Today we're at 135. And last month we were at 17.8 million in revenues, and we're at about the same number today. So again, we'll come back every month and report on these metrics as long as you'll have us.
Councilman Waring had a question.
So I just want to make sure you got a lot of numbers strung up
Yeah.
there. So it's 4,055 have been reviewed. So you found 656 plus the 135 of those 4,055.
Sure.
They're a subgroup, so I don't know what percentage that is. Are you expecting to kind of find the same percentage in the other remaining 1,500?
I would imagine so. It's, as Paul
It's
mentioned.
not like you went to the lowest hanging fruit first or anything. You're just kind of working through it.
One department at a time.
Okay, one department at a time.
Yeah.
So, and you said you only have aviation left?
Yeah, so Councilman Waring, so you can do the quick math and go, well, gosh, there's about 1,500 parcels that are the aviation department. And as I think I've mentioned before,
I was going to ask that. So that's right, 1,500.
that's about roughly what we are aware of. And so of the 1,500, almost 800 of those the airport owns for noise mitigation reasons that are west of 16th Street. And so as we have previously told you, those sit in a federal process that we continue to work our way through with the community and the FAA that we need to conclude before we proceed with disposing of those properties. But I believe that's this spring, by summer we'll.
The idea is not to hold on to those 800, but we can't sell them right now. Is that a fair summary?
I would tell you for the airport selling land, the federal government has made it not impossible but challenging. And so typically when the airport disposes of properties, it oftentimes is by long-term lease, which is how the airport does most of its long-term transactions. I do think west of 16th Street, there's going to be more flexibility because there aren't parcels that really there are a diversity of parcel sizes.
But you can use the land.
Yeah, the land can't, the
You
land.
wouldn't want to have a house there because of the noise, but
We're pursuing with the community a pretty diverse set of use options across time. But yes, the land is anticipated to get into production. Certainly, some large majority of that we would probably pursue sale. Others of that may be better suited to lease. And then of the balance of the airport's real estate, much of it is not going to be disposed of because of runways, all of that kinds of things. But I'm sure we will share with you in the dozens of other parcels that will be made available for disposal, but most certainly will not be for sale, but will be for lease because of their proximity to runways and support for aviation-specific uses. But we're going to work through that here across the next month and be back to tell you that story in more precise detail. But it will all, the focus is moving land into production, most certainly, whether by sale or lease.
So, Madam Chair, Paul, I'm not telling you what to do. Don't sell the runways. That would be bad. So
I haven't learned much, but that's one I do
So good,
have.
good. I just wanna
I'm
make sure
I'm
we're all on the same page.
Councilman Waring
here.
takes a stand in favor
Yeah,
of the runway.
yeah. So if I'm understanding you, you've got roughly 1,500 at the airport. About half of those are these noise mitigation properties. Probably can't sell them right now. Might be able to do something with them, but that's almost as many as we've had in the entire rest of the city. So next month you'll come back with another chart. So the 656 plus the 135 is roughly 800. You're going to have another 800, but we shouldn't get too excited because we might have to lease it rather than sell it. But it's not necessarily going to sit on the books in perpetuity, being a drag on the ticket either.
I think I think the big picture message I would want to send to the council is staff has done a deep dive in looking at all of our assets, and we have identified those that we aren't currently delivering, absent the airport, currently delivering services through the use of that property, or that are in very near term being put into production. So we have identified land that is not currently needed for producing city services and will not be for some period of time. And we are working our way through recommending to you how we dispose of that. So I think, big picture, we now know kind of with a pretty high degree of certainty what land is not used to deliver city services and should move towards some kind of a disposal process.
So of the 5,500 overall, I assume you probably are right about what's at the airport, about roughly 1,600 of the properties we either shouldn't have had or we should have been leasing and so forth. That's about 1/4. It just seems like how this went undiscovered for so long. I mean, it's 1/4 of our properties were stuff that's not really advancing the city ball. Is that a fair assessment? If I was just
I
looking at the
would
numbers?
tell you the land west of the airport has been in more than 15 or 20 years of process for providing noise mitigation benefits.
We can take that out of it. It's still 12.5% roughly.
And then I would
it
tell
still
you-
seems like a big number to be having just sat there
Sure.
in perpetuity, basically, until we started to complain.
It is fair that a lot of work has been done that had not previously been done to move parcels from an unproductive use towards productive use. And I think I have specific knowledge about the airport because I worked there for a long time. I would think it would be fair to say that of the parcels, about 650 of those, about almost 400, the council had previously authorized the disposal of in the housing department. But it's completely accurate, Councilman, to say there's at least 300 parcels up there where it was a new idea that we should start pursuing disposal of those.
I'm not assigning blame to you guys. I'm just saying, I'm glad we're having this discussion now. Wish we would have had it a while ago. We would have saved a lot of, I'm sure, cleanup fees and stuff to deal with these properties that we weren't doing anything with.
So I would, Madam Chair, Councilman Ware and Subcommittee, I think, if the first message is we've worked our way through and we kind of know what is at issue. The second piece is it is very clear by the investment of time and energy that staff has put in that if we do not continue to have a rigorous, continuous effort pursuing the disposal and monitoring of this, it would, if left to its own devices, this will devolve back into, because it needs to be someone's, what we ask the real estate department to do, or division, is a narrow slice of everything that needs to get done to keep this property moving into production. So I would tell you, one of the things we will want to come back to you is to talk to you about the programmatic nature of things we need to do across time to make sure we're keeping our eye on this ball. But I think it's fair to say staff clearly has heard the council's interest in us pursuing this. We think we're making good progress. And but we know we are far from done. Many steps to take to continue to keep ourselves in tune with what's necessary to get done so we can achieve the best return for the city, move property into production, and deliver great services.
Madam Chair, I would certainly agree with the good progress. I certainly think from where we were 3 years ago, I forget how long it's been, I definitely think this is better than it was. And a couple of you probably weren't here when this started, but this was a long time coming, but now progress is being made. It sounds like from what you just said about continuing it, staff has evaluated this and decided it was well worth the effort. Because I know it takes effort to get to this point, but the savings and everything, I assume, more than compensate, and the sale price, the $17.8 million.
It is the return on the investment of energy and time is completely worth it.
Okay.
We should be about this, absolutely.
Okay.
It is the good right. It is, I said this to somebody last week, it's good government. This is what we should be about.
So let's take the airport out of it, of the 4,055, and I forget all the categories in the pink line that I guess I'm assuming the audience can see. The 38, the 1, the 43, et cetera, across. The 656, those a year from now or however long we can expect to have been sold.
So we're Councilman, in the lower numbers, we have certainty of process. I would tell you in the 417 are things we're going to be coming back to this subcommittee and some other subcommittees to describe the disposal process for those. There's a couple of departments, neighborhood services and housing, who have a very large inventory that has some very specific federal limitations on how they can sell. But I think what we commit absolutely is we will
try.
We're going to describe an actual process that we're going to walk through, get your feedback and advice, and then they will come to either this committee or another subcommittee on the actual RFPing in some cases for these properties. So while we will be at this for a little bit, But it's certainly a year from now, I think the team, the city staff team will be able to report further progress in actual disposal. Of that, I am comfortable and confident.
Madam Chair, just sorry, one more thing. So take the airport out of it. The 4,055 is all city properties or just the ones you reviewed?
That's the ones we reviewed absent the airport.
But what does that encompass? That's,
Every single, that encompasses the
that
land.
includes City Hall?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So
And so I think there is going to be we're going to come back through the subcommittee and we're going to come describe the negative side of the equation. And by that, I mean not what's to dispose, but we're going to describe the properties that we're keeping, not because we specifically think you need to approve keeping City Hall or the runways, but we want to make sure we articulate here's kind of where the profile of the city assets are. So we have comfort and confidence of knowing what it was we decided to not recommend forward. There are going to be a few parcels that we have not recommended for disposal that are not currently in production that relate to some very specific things in a couple of departments that are the very next thing they're going to do, whether it's in, particularly the fire department has a couple of parcels.
Madam Chair, so Leslie, so the 4,055, let's say of the 656 in the line below, we get rid of 500 of them over the next couple of years. So the city inventory will have dropped, apart from the airport, from 4,055 to about 3,555. I mean, that's a pretty substantial reduction in our
Yes.
overall properties.
Yes.
Well worth the time and effort. Keep at it. Thank you.
We-
Thanks. Madam Chair, Subcommittee. One more piece of progress I'd like to report on, and that's the website that has all the city properties that are for sale went live March 1st as promised. Across the top, you can see the address for the site. It's phoenix.gov/PHX properties. In case you can't remember that web address, there's an easy way to get to the site. Again, you click on the Doing Business in Phoenix and then click on the Properties for Sale button, and that takes visitors directly to the new site. We currently have 38 parcels for sale. The list price for those parcels is about $6.5 million, and this list will grow quite quickly as we get formal approval to sell properties. So next, I'll pass the clicker over to Jamie Spear, and Jamie's going to walk us through staff recommendations for the dedication and disposal of 146 parcels.
Good morning. So through this process, we have found properties that we own, we shouldn't own. This is an example of a quick claim, a property we are proposing to quit claim. It's City of Glendale water infrastructure, and it's actually located in the City of Glendale, not in Phoenix. We believe it was part of a larger transaction of water facilities, and it just was not conveyed originally when it should have been. We have another one like that that's a City of Scottsdale roadway. We have several parcels, 131 to be exact, that are currently roadways. Those should have been dedicated at some point in time, either through plat or through an ordinance, but for whatever reason, that did not happen. These are some of the larger sites that we have. This one is Cactus and 21st Avenue. These parcels range from just a couple hundred square feet to we have up to 100,000 square feet of roadway that needs to be dedicated. So we will be working through the process of getting those dedicated. Those APNs will drop off of the tax rolls and will become roadway to accurately depict what their use is for. Here's another dedication example. This was a dedication by plat, but for some reason it never was dedicated, so we will be taking ordinance forward to dedicate that. And one more example of a dedication. As you can see, most of these have been existing roadways for quite some time, so it's mostly cleanup work, but it will help clean up our inventory. NSD has 13 vacant lots in Garfield, and they'll be presenting for an RFP after our presentation. And then I'll turn it back over to Paul.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, our request is your recommendation to the full city council to dispose of these 146 parcels as described in the chart. and we're prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Councilwoman.
So, we have a case coming up on Wednesday, and it used to be city-owned property, and they're going through a rezoning, and there's a lot of opposition to it, a lot of support too, opposition. When you go through that process, how do you vet that so that there's some assurances that whoever wants to buy it may be able to develop the land? I mean, how are we marketing? And it's probably because I'm new, I may not understand how you're doing this. So.
No worries. So the process we walk through is first we figure out that there's no city department who needs it, and then the second is we go visit with the council office where this property is located, and learn if they have any questions or concerns. And then we market the property, then we come and request in a venue like this, and then ultimately the city council authority to dispose of that property, and then we market it. And we very specifically market it with the zoning as it is currently in place. We make no warrants to prospective buyers of what might happen, what may happen, what's possible. And so it is incumbent upon the buyer to do their own due diligence and evaluate what they believe to be any issues that may arise for whatever future uses that they want to pursue. I think given your background, Councilman, you understand clearly we can't actually go and zone it subject to a contract in the disposal process. And so that's ultimately, because of that limitation in state law, we need to really leave that to the next buyer if they want to pursue the situation further for land use.
So when we sell it at, if it's residential, we're
We sell
selling
it
it residential and not
as is, where is,
All right.
and the valuation would be set. So if it was residential property and it's got residential zoning on it, its valuation is based on that current position, because while you could value it for some future zoning action, we're not presuming any zoning action is going to proceed from the community, village planning committees, planning commission, or the council. We encourage people to do their homework and offer us what they think the land is worth.
Thank you.
We have two cards. First, we will call up our alum of the City Council, Craig Tripkin.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you. Is this on? Thank you, Madam Chairperson and the committee. I just wanted to, well, several things. I want to compliment, in particular, the Housing Department and the Neighborhood Services Department and Mr. Blue for having a lot of foresight in terms of how these properties ought to be used and disposing them. I'm here to tell you, as many of you know, I represent, or I work for Central Arizona Shelter Services and also Arizona Housing, Inc., which is our sister agency that provides affordable housing. And I will tell you that I think we're mostly housing formerly homeless people. 30% to 50% of AMI, which would be take-you rents starting at $700 and below, actually, in most cases. And I believe there is a coming affordability crisis in the city of Phoenix, and I don't know if we'll see it in a year or 2 years or 3 years, but the apartment units that are under construction right now are asking $1,200 to $2,000 in most cases. And the market may correct and take care of some of that, but I'd like to just encourage you and encourage the city to look at potential properties for affordable housing opportunities as you proceed with this. There are very few tools that are allowed legally anymore in the state of Arizona, and you all know the GPLET suit that is going on right now. But there's very few tools other than incentives or using existing city land for affordable housing, for truly affordable housing to take people out of homelessness. And that is, again, going to be a 30% of AMI kind of number at best in most cases. So I want to compliment everybody for what they've done, and I do want to encourage the committee and the city to keep looking at affordable housing as an important part of a long-term strategy for making sure, a city, a neighborhood has the ecology of like a pond. It's got to be churning all the time, and it's got to have diversity. And diversity includes diversity of incomes, diversity of types of people, and I think that it's very important to not have a monoculture, and I think diversity throughout the city, all over the city and regionally, is important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Greta Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I brought this concern of the cities sitting on inert real estate to the council 5 years ago, again 3 years ago, and 2 years ago. I'm glad we're finally addressing this situation. The city has allowed this to sit idle and non-productive since point of beginning. And that's why it's a complicated situation to plan for disposal of and to execute. I had a meeting on January 5 with Paul Blue. We sat in his office and we talked for probably an hour and a half. I've had 2 other meetings, long meetings with him by phone on this subject. This is the area in which I practiced my profession for 29 years in residential. I want the city to proceed. If any department has a plan for a specific piece of land within 5 years, that should be off the chart. But if it's 5 or more years, it's available. And that includes housing and neighborhood services. The city has sat with this plethora of land since point of beginning, and it's just grown like mold in the inventory the city has. We need the income, and we need the continuing property tax income from this. And those parcels, which probably are close to a majority, if not a majority, that are not developable because of size, quit claim them to A and B and pay the recording fees and be done with it. They will add to the property tax. And if A doesn't want it, give it all to B. Just get rid of it and put it on the tax roll. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from my colleague? With that, would entertain a motion.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Wonderful. Thank you for that update. We will look forward to next month's update and to our related agenda item, which is agenda number 7, lots in Garfield. This one's very exciting to me as the councilwoman who gets the pleasure of representing the Garfield neighborhood.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm Chris Hallett, the Neighborhood Services Director. I have with me Jesse Garcia. He's our Housing Development Manager. We're here this morning to present to you and ask for the subcommittee recommendation to issue a request for proposals to dispose of and develop 13 lots in our Garfield Neighborhood Initiative area. This has been a long-standing strategic area that we've worked in. We have several members of the community here today in support who we've interacted with up to this process. So we're very excited to come off a very long hiatus to be able to continue our revitalization efforts in the Garfield area. So I'll hand it over to Jesse, who will walk us through the RFP process.
Thank you, Madam Chair and subcommittee members. Based on the previous presentation, I want to let you know staff has heard the message, put land in production. And that's why we're here today. And it's an exciting opportunity for us. We're seeking the opportunity to release a request for proposal for 13 lots in the Garfield neighborhood. The history, we've used federal dollars in this neighborhood for the last 20 years to remove slum and blight. Slum and blight is a program that allows us to get rid of and demolish crack houses, abandoned structures, properties that are now being deemed feasible in neighborhoods, and we've been doing this for the last 20 years in this particular neighborhood. Council has approved two action plans over the last 20 years, one in 1992, the Garfield Neighborhood Plan, and also in 1999, the Garfield Redevelopment Plan. We're using those as guidelines to redevelop these particular properties. To date, our activity in neighborhood services, we have built 48 infill homes in this neighborhood. We've also, with our previous federal grant, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, we have rehabbed 8 infill houses, and we've also rehabbed in this neighborhood 867 houses. We've done a lot of work in this neighborhood, and we're very proud of it. So this is the map with the addresses in the area. 5 of the lots that we're looking to dispose of the 13, sit in an historic district. And that's very important. And just in context, we do have a variety of zoning in this area. We have one property at R16, and we have multiple properties that range from R13 to R15. So zoning is and those zonings will stay with the property. Let's see here. Community feedback. We started this process with this RFP in December with the assistance with the chair, Councilwoman Gallegos. We appreciate the help and the insight. So we have had meetings in December, and we also had a meeting in February in regards to what does the neighborhood looking for us to do. Because that's part of what we have to do when you're in a redevelopment plan. Feedback that we received, we put over 2,500 mailers out to the neighborhood. We had 2 Garfield meetings. We had multiple meetings with the Garfield organization. I think Dana's here today. The community feedback will be incorporated in the RFP, which is very important to the criteria and desires of the neighborhood and the community. We've heard them, and we understand what they're looking for as regards to the product that's going to go into this neighborhood. Some of the things that will be important, as you can see in this slide, is home ownership opportunity is one of the, probably the number one opportunity. They didn't want to see more rental properties. They wanted the product that was put on these properties to be of historic character or in character, or in line with the neighborhood. Obviously, they're going to be building a new standard, so it's a little bit different, but as you can see, that's a front porch. We'd like to see houses with front porch. And affordability, I did hear somebody earlier in the previous presentation mention affordability, and that is a key component that we're looking to write into the RFP. So here's the evaluation of the criteria for the RFP, and we did take some neighborhood input on this, and we're putting a large number of points to the scope and scale of the proposed project, which is very important. This is where we're going to get what we want because we're giving it the highest value, okay? Proposer's business plan and financial capacity would be 250. We want experienced individuals that have the capacity. We're estimating these 13 properties to be in close to $1 million. So there's a lot of money tied up in these 13 properties. Proposed qualification experience, very important, 200 points, and then a financial return back to the city. Timeline. This is what we're looking at as a timeline for the RFP. We're here today to get your guys' approval. I hope we have it. And then April 9 to go to City Council formal. And then in June, release the RFP as staff is starting to already formulate and put things together. So with that, I'd like to put it back to Chris.
So we're happy to answer any questions, but we are here to get your recommendation for City Council approval to issue this RFP to, again, dispose of and develop these 13 infill lots.
Wonderful, thank you. If it's okay with my colleagues, I'll do cards first. First card is from Dana Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gallego and various members. I'm Dana Johnson. I'm the president of Garfield Neighborhood. And yes, we've worked with Chris for many years. We appreciate it. And to start with, those 13 lots and all the others, those vacant lots look a hell of a lot better than they did before they tore them down. So our neighborhood already looks better for you taking them, so thank you to start with that. I'm really not sure that we need to rush into it. I would like to get some things done about it and make sure that, one, these are affordable. Our neighborhood is gentrifying so fast, it makes your head spin. With the development pressures of downtown and ASU, et cetera, our rents, some new construction, it's skyrocketing. A lot of people are not going to be able to live in our neighborhood very soon. Therefore, we need the affordability. Secondly, per Jesse commented on how this is based on some of our Garfield neighborhood plan. That plan recommended downzoning. We have built about 50 houses like this where we acquired properties and built it, and now Trellis used to be Neighborhood Housing Services of Phoenix, built new properties on there. Every one of those properties, in agreement with our neighborhood, those properties were all downzoned from R3, R4, sometimes R5, down to R1-6. So I would appreciate that these properties get downzoned before they get sold. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your longtime leadership for Garfield and our arts community. Dan Clocky.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Dan Clocky, and I have the privilege of serving on the Garfield board as a representative of downtown. And so I've been there for about 2 years, and I've seen all the efforts that the neighborhood has put into the neighborhood and the housing and just everything, as well as NSD and as well as you, Councilwoman. And I really appreciate that. One of the things that obviously Dan already mentioned is just the tremendous pressure, real estate pressure that's on the community. In my sort of day job, I serve on really watching the real estate market of downtown. I can tell you that back in 2009, you could buy a house in Garfield for $40,000 after the crash. Now, most of them are going for well over $200,000, and some actually have hit $300,000. So Dana's concerns are very valid, I think. So I would just, again, like to emphasize the importance of trying to figure out the affordability side of things as much as possible, looking at different ways of doing that. So building flexibility into this RFP, I think, is really important. And I know NSD is looking at that already. We've had a lot of conversations. So I appreciate that this is moving along. I think it's going to be very helpful for the community to fill in some of these sort of pulled teeth, if you will, that line some of the streets. Thank you.
Actually, while we have you there, could I ask you a question? This is unfair, and I didn't warn you I was going to do this. You presented some great information, I think, to the downtown subcommittee about the housing stock in around downtown and sort of where our gaps are in terms of price points.
Yeah, so in particular, councilwoman members of the subcommittee, from a rental perspective, this is a little bit different, obviously, than Garfield. Really where the gap is the largest is in that $800 to $1,000 range. There is some affordable housing in downtown that sort of falls under that $700 to $750 range, and then the bulk of it then is $1,200 and above. In fact, there is not a single unit in any of the larger complexes that fall between $800 and $1,000. So sort of that just above affordable range is really hard, first, to build because there are no tax credits, and two, just making the numbers come together can be pretty challenging. So an ownership opportunity that comes in probably somewhere above that. I'm realistic. No one's getting a mortgage for $1,000 a month. But to figure out the most creative ways and to build that into the RFP, which I know they're working on, would be very helpful. So from an ownership perspective, you're probably not going to find anything under probably about $200 a square foot. In some of the surrounding historic districts, you can find that, but it's pretty rare at this point.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a card from Diane Barker.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and subcommittee. I'm interested that you will impart the values that the city has been after, particularly in the last 2 months, for sustainability. And that will be a big part of the RFP. I'm going to have to go back and review this. I was out speaking with Greta, and I told her I wanted to get back in here. And she says, well, whatever they do, make sure that they have a plan and they deliver everything within no more than 5 years.
Wonderful, thank you. And it's was something we did hear during the community meetings, that they did want to see sustainable construction. We did have a little bit of a differing point of view about whether people wanted solar or not solar on roofs. I think there were some people who wanted solar, but a few more who wanted more traditional roofs that look like the historic character of the neighborhoods.
Just from a previous presentation regarding the home design, the Neighborhood Services won a 2013 Valley Forward Award for sustainability. We built 14 new homes at the Gordon Estates that were received the highest energy standards. So we're already built as a department to do that type of product. So we're excited to get another opportunity on these infill houses, and that would be written into the RFP.
So we'd look for Energy Star
Absolutely.
appliances. And
Absolutely.
Councilwoman.
Just as a follow-up to the down zoning, so some of the properties are R3, R5. Are we agreeing to down zone to an R16? Is that, or are we trying to market these as R3, R5? Thanks.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Stark, we were looking at multiple different ways of either downzoning or doing a deed restriction that would inhibit their, so we've done it in different ways in different areas. We've yet to try the deed restriction, which was a recommendation from our Planning Development Department on a prior infill. So we're still trying to research the best possible way. You know, timing and everything else can have an impact. There's certainly the city can do it ahead of time, which we've done on others. We can put it upon the developer who's awarded the project, or otherwise look at a deed restriction.
Wonderful, thank you. Any further questions from my colleagues? I think the community will be very excited to see this move forward. So with that, would entertain a motion.
I'm so moved. I spent part of my childhood in this particular neighborhood, and you know, I still, when a day like today, when I have a few minutes, I get down to Doritos for
Oh.
like you know, one of the best burritos you'll ever have. And I really care about this community, and I just love that we're moving in this direction. I think the points are well stated, that we have to be careful with the gentrification and make sure that things are done responsibly, but it's a safer community today than when it was when I was growing up there as well. So that's also very important. So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our agendized items for today. Do we have any council member requests for future presentations? In April, we will mark Fair Housing Month, and there are many milestones related to sustainability, so it should be a good agenda next month. Thank you all for joining us.